What's coming next isn't just another recession or a temporary slowdown. It's the kind of shift that changes history. The type of change that generations look back on and say, that's when everything turned. Right now, we're watching the United States, the world's most dominant empire for the last century, begin to lose its grip, while China, once dismissed as a sleeping giant, rises to claim the role of global leader. Most people, want to face that reality, because it challenges everything they've been told about America's exceptionalism and about the permanence of U.S. dominance. But denial doesn't erase the facts, and the signs are everywhere. You see it in the numbers, in the struggles of everyday people, in the endless wars we couldn't win, in the rising costs of basic survival like healthcare and education, and in the sense that the system is rigged against ordinary Americans, while the wealthy keep pulling ahead. If you've ever felt like no matter how hard you work, the deck is stacked, then you've already felt the symptoms of decline. Because in strong, rising empires, people feel optimism about the future. In declining ones, people feel trapped, stuck, and increasingly desperate. Think about healthcare. The United States spends more per person on healthcare than any other country in the world, and millions of Americans still can't afford to see a doctor. Medical debt isn't some rare tragedy. It's the #1 reason people file for bankruptcy. That's not strength, it's weakness. It's a system designed to enrich insurance companies, hospitals, and pharmaceutical giants, while ordinary families get crushed. And education. We love to brag about our universities, but look at the price tag. Student debt has ballooned past $1.7 trillion. Young people are starting their adult lives already buried under loans, delaying buying homes, starting families, or even pursuing careers they're passionate about because their financial chains are too heavy. Meanwhile, other countries are educating their youth at a fraction of the cost, or even for free, giving them a running start while our next generation begins the race exhausted and in debt. Then there's war. America has the most powerful military on earth, but what have we actually achieved with it in the last few decades? We spent trillions of dollars fighting in Iraq and Afghanistan, only to walk away without victory. The world saw the images. Helicopters lifting off from rooftops in Kabul, chaos on the ground, allies abandoned. That kind of failure doesn't just humiliate teens, changes global perception. Superpowers aren't supposed to lose wars, but we did, and the rest of the world took note. And while our government keeps pouring money into endless military ventures, back home life expectancy is actually going down. Think about that for a second. In one of the richest nations in history, the average person can now expect to live a shorter life than their parents. That's not progress. That's decline, pure and simple. Now, let's put this in perspective. Empires throughout history follow a pattern. They rise, they dominate, and eventually, they fall. Rome, Britain, Spain, they all thought their dominance would last forever, until it didn't. And America is no different. The cracks we're seeing now: inequality, healthcare failures, educational burdens, endless war spending, political polarization. These aren't isolated issues. They're symptoms of an empire that's losing its edge. Meanwhile, on the other side of the world, China is surging forward. This isn't about praising China or saying it's a perfect system. It's not. But the contrast is undeniable. While Americans are drowning in debt just to stay healthy or get educated, China has invested heavily in infrastructure, technology, and global partnerships. While the U.S. is stuck fighting wars it can't win, China is signing trade deals, building influence, quietly becoming the factory and, increasingly, the innovator of the world. Think about it. Just a few decades ago, made in China meant cheap, low-quality products. Today, it's China leading in 5G technology, in electric vehicles, in renewable energy, in artificial intelligence. They're not just copying anymore. They're competing, and in many areas, they're winning. And while the US government can barely agree on a budget without shutting itself down, China rolls out long-term strategic plans that span decades. They're playing chess while we're arguing over checkers. And here's the uncomfortable truth. For ordinary Americans, this shift isn't some abstract geopolitical drama, it's personal. It affects jobs, wages, housing, healthcare, and the value of the dollar in your pocket. When America loses influence, the world doesn't bend to our rules the way it used to, and that has real consequences for your everyday life. Remember, the US dollar has been the world's reserve currency for decades, giving us enormous power. It lets us print money, run massive deficits, and still have the world buy our debt. But if China, along with other rising economies, starts pulling away from the dollar, that privilege disappears. Inflation skyrockets, borrowing costs rise, and suddenly, everyday Americans feel the squeeze in ways they've never experienced before. And guess what? It's already happening, slowly but surely. Countries are signing deals to trade in their own currencies, bypassing the dollar. Central banks around the world are increasing their gold reserves. And China, with its Belt and Road Initiative, is locking in economic relationships with dozens of nations. They're building a new system, and the US is being left out. Now, before we go deeper, if you're finding this breakdown valuable, do me a quick favor. Hit that subscribe button right now. This is where we cut through the noise and bring you the truth behind the headlines. The stuff most media won't connect for you. Empires rise and fall. But being informed puts you ahead. So subscribe, because what's coming next is too important to ignore. And here's the thing about decline. It doesn't always look dramatic at first. It's not like one day America is strong and the next day it collapses. It's slow, almost invisible, until suddenly it's obvious. Think of a crumbling bridge. You don't notice the cracks right away. But one day, under enough pressure, the whole thing gives way. That's where we are now. The bridge is cracking. Families working 2 jobs still can't afford rent. People with health insurance still go bankrupt for medical bills. College graduates can't afford to buy homes. Parents worry their kids will be worse off than they are. That's not the American dream. That's the American struggle. And while we're stuck in that struggle, politicians keep distracting us with culture wars, partisan fights, and finger-pointing, while the real problems go unaddressed. Meanwhile, China is laser-focused on growth. They're rebuilding massive high-speed rail networks, while we can't even fix our roads and bridges. They're investing in AI, robotics, green energy, and manufacturing, while our industries get hollowed out by outsourcing and short-term profit chasing. They're planning for the next 50 years, while our leaders can barely plan past the next election cycle. And maybe the most telling sign, for the first time in modern history, surveys show that young Americans aren't confident their future will be better than their parents. That's a dramatic shift. Rising empires promise hope. Declining empires deliver doubt. And this is where history gives us a warning, because no empire, no matter how mighty, is immune from decline, and the warning signs are not subtle anymore. Take inequality. America has always had rich and poor, but never before has the gap been this wide, and never before has it felt so locked in. Billionaires are adding billions to their wealth in months, while ordinary families can't cover a $500 emergency without going into debt. Think about how absurd that is. One man buys a 3rd yacht, while millions can afford a trip to the doctor. And we're told this is just how capitalism works. But here's the twist. It's not how capitalism used to work, not even in America. In the mid-20th century, during the so-called golden age of American capitalism, wages rose alongside productivity. If the economy grew, workers benefited. Families could afford a house, a car, a vacation, and still save for retirement. All that extra value gets funneled up to the top, leaving the rest of us scrambling just to tread water. China is lifting hundreds of millions of its citizens out of poverty. Let that sink in. While inequality here worsens, inequality there is narrowing. They've gone from a primarily rural, struggling nation to an urban, middle-class powerhouse in just a few decades. It took the West centuries to industrialize and modernize. China has done it in one lifetime. And if you think that doesn't matter to you, think again. Because when another country can mobilize its population, invest in technology, and dominate manufacturing, it changes the balance of global power and your place in it. Now, let's talk about currency. Because this is one of the quietest but most important shifts happening under our feet. For decades, the US dollar has been king. Oil is priced in dollars. International trade flows through dollars. Global reserves are held in dollars. That's given America an incredible advantage, what economists call the exorbitant privilege. It's why we can run up massive deficits without immediate collapse, why we can print money in crises and still maintain credibility, why we can sanction countries and expect them to bend to our will. But what happens when the world decides it doesn't need the dollar anymore? What happens when countries like China, Russia, and even US allies start trading in their own currencies? That's not a theoretical future, it's already happening. The BRICS nations, which now include some of the fastest growing economies, are openly discussing alternatives to the dollar. Central banks around the world are buying gold at record levels, hedging against US currency dominance. If the dollar loses its status as the world's reserve currency, everyday Americans will feel the shock. Imports get more expensive, interest rates rise, inflation hits harder. And suddenly the lifestyle we've gotten used, too cheap goods from abroad, low borrowing costs, global financial dominance disappears. That's the kind of shift that can transform the middle class into the struggling class almost overnight. And here's the irony. While America's political leaders argue about who to blame, China just keeps moving forward. They're not caught up in endless partisan gridlock. They don't shut down their government every time there's a budget disagreement. They don't paralyze themselves with culture wars while their infrastructure collapses. Instead, they're laying out 20-year plans, investing in future industries, and building global alliances through initiatives like the Belt and Road. They're financing ports in Africa, railways in Asia, power plants in Latin America. They're weaving a web of influence that stretches across continents, while America retreats into isolation and bickers internally. That's how empires get replaced, not with a bang, but with the steady rise of a competitor that's more disciplined, more focused, and more strategic. And make no mistake, this isn't about whether you like or dislike China. It's about recognizing the reality of power shifting from west to east, and what that means for you, your job, your savings, and your future. And if you're still skeptical, look at technology. For decades, Silicon Valley was the unquestioned hub of innovation. If you wanted the best tech, you looked to America. But today, China is leading in key areas that will define the future. They're pouring billions into artificial intelligence. They're building renewable energy at a scale the US can't touch. They've created digital payment systems so advanced that cash is practically obsolete in major Chinese cities. While in America, people still fumble with checks and outdated systems. This isn't about catching up anymore. In some areas, they've already passed us. And technology isn't just gadgets, it's power. Whoever leads in AI, in quantum computing, in energy storage, in biotech, will shape the future world order. And right now, that leader is looking less like America and more like China. And let's not forget culture, because cultural confidence is another marker of a rising or declining power. And right now, America is showing signs of deep insecurity. A confident society builds, creates, and looks outward with optimism. But America today is increasingly polarized, angry, and distrustful. We can't agree on facts, we don't trust our institutions, and even the idea of truth itself has become political. That's not what strength looks like. That's what decline feels like on the inside. Meanwhile, China projects unity, discipline, and purpose. Again, that's not to say it's perfect or without problems, but perception matters in global power. If the world sees one country as fractured and another as focused, they know which one to bet on in the long run. And speaking of perception, think about how American power used to be portrayed. Hollywood music, brands, cultural exports that dominated the globe. Everyone wanted to wear jeans, listen to rock and roll, watch American movies, and emulate the lifestyle. That cultural dominance reinforced our economic and military dominance. But now, young people around the world are just as likely to consume Korean dramas, Chinese tech, or European culture. America is still influential, but no longer unrivaled. Cultural dominance is shifting too, and that reflects the larger story of America's fading shine. Now, let's zoom in on what this means for ordinary Americans, because that's really the heart of it. When empires decline, it's not just elites who feel the impact, it's working people, families, communities. Jobs get outsourced or automated. Wages stagnate while costs rise. Public services crumble as resources get drained into wars or debt payments. Inequality grows until the middle class shrinks into near extinction. We're already living through this. If you felt that you're working harder than ever, but getting less in return, that's not in your head. That's the system decaying. If you felt like owning a home is out of reach, or that healthcare and education are luxuries instead of rights, that's decline. If you watched your parents retire comfortably, while you wonder if you will ever stop working, that's what it looks like when a society moves backward instead of forward. Meanwhile, the wealthy insulate themselves in gated communities, private jets, and offshore accounts, disconnected from the suffering of the majority. That widening divide, left unchecked, tears societies apart from within. Rome didn't fall because of one invasion, rotted from inequality and corruption long before the final blow came. And here we are, repeating the pattern. And here, where China's rise hits home again. When another country becomes the economic engine of the world. Jobs, capital, and innovation flow there, not here. American workers compete not just with each other, but with a global labor force. American companies chase cheaper costs abroad while hollowing out towns at home. Manufacturing that once built thriving communities in the Midwest now powers cities in China. The result? Generation of Americans growing up with fewer opportunities, less security, and declining expectations. That's how decline feels, not in grand speeches, but in empty factories. Closed schools, unaffordable rent, and uncertain futures. And yet, in the face of all this, our leaders keep offering the same tired solutions. More military spending, more tax cuts for the wealthy, more promises that somehow the market will fix itself. But the market isn't fixing itself. It's fixing to leave millions behind. That's why you see so much anger in America today. People sense the decline, even if they don't always connect the dots. Why people are reaching for alternatives, radical ones? Because when the center can't hold, people search for answers anywhere. That's another classic sign of decline. Political instability. And make no mistake, instability doesn't make a nation stronger, weakens it further, creating openings for rivals to advance. And while America argues, China builds. While we divide ourselves, they position themselves to dominate the 21st century. Now, let's consider the global picture. For decades, America dictated the terms of international order. Institutions like the IMF, World Bank, NATO, all tools of American influence. But that influence is waning. More countries are joining alternative groups led by China or aligned with it. Trade deals no longer revolve solely around Washington. Beijing is at the table, often at the head. America used to be the indispensable nation. Today, it's seen by many as unreliable, inconsistent, even reckless. And when trust erodes, alliances weaken. Think of it this way. If you were a small or medium-sized country looking to the future, do you bet on a divided America that can't pass a budget or a rising China that promises infrastructure, trade, and investment? Many are choosing the latter, and every time they do, America's dominance shrinks a little more. And here's the kicker. Decline is not inevitable. but it is the path we're on unless something dramatic changes. The US still has immense resources, brilliant minds, technological capacity, and military strength. But those advantages are being squandered by short-term thinking, corruption, and division. It's not too late to turn things around, but pretending everything is fine is the surest way to ensure decline becomes collapse. The first step is recognizing reality. America is not invincible, not permanent, not immune from history. Empires fall. Ours is already stumbling. The question is whether we face it honestly and adapt, or keep living in denial until the fall is undeniable. And to truly grasp what's happening, we have to understand the psychology of empire. Because it's not just about economics and military power, it's also about mindset. And America's mindset right now is trapped in nostalgia. We keep talking about making America great again, or restoring the American dream. But notice the key word there: restore. We're looking backward, not forward. A rising power doesn't dream of restoration, it dreams of creation, of what's coming next, of what it's about to build. China isn't talking about going back to some golden age. It's talking about the future, about new technology, new systems, new global leadership. America is clinging to memories while China is writing the next chapter, and history tells us which mindset usually wins. When Britain declined as an empire, it too romanticized its past, talking endlessly about its former glory, even as new powers surpassed it. America is falling into the same trap, mistaking nostalgia for strategy. And that's dangerous because while we dream of yesterday, we're losing tomorrow. And you can see this cultural decline everywhere, even in entertainment and media. American film, once the undisputed global leader, is now facing competition from around the world. Our music, fashion, and art still matter, but they're no longer setting the pace. Even our politics has become entertainment. A circus of personalities and scandals designed for clicks instead of solutions. Meanwhile, China is using its cultural tools strategically, exporting films, apps, and platforms designed to spread influence. TikTok isn't just a fun distraction, it's a symbol of how quickly a Chinese company can dominate global culture. And what's America's response? Trying to ban it because we can't outcompete it. That's not strength. That's fear. When you can't compete with new ideas and innovation, you resort to blocking them. That's not how a leader behaves. That's how a power in decline reacts. Now, some will argue that America still has unmatched advantages: a massive economy, the world's reserve currency, a powerful military, and innovation hubs like Silicon Valley. And all of that is true. But here's the problem. Advantage doesn't last forever if you don't invest in it, maintain it, and evolve. Look at infrastructure. We drive on crumbling roads, cross aging bridges, and ride subways that break down constantly, while China builds sleek high-speed rail systems connecting cities at 200 miles per hour. Look at education. Our public schools are underfunded and overstressed, while theirs are expanding STEM programs and producing engineers and scientists at a scale we can match. Look at healthcare. We let profits dictate who lives and who dies, while they treat health as a national priority. Again, not perfect systems, but the trend lines are clear. One country is reinvesting in its foundation. The other is letting its foundation crack. And if you know anything about history, once the foundation goes, the whole house eventually follows. And yet, Americans have been told for decades that everything is fine, that our problems are just temporary, that growth will solve everything. But ask yourself, has that been your experience? Do you feel like the system is working for you? Or do you feel like you're working harder just to stay in place? That's the reality millions of Americans face, and it's the reality of decline. Because decline doesn't mean collapse overnight. It means the gradual erosion of opportunity, of security, of trust. It means the slow squeeze of inflation, debt, and stagnation. It means the feeling that the future is slipping away from your children. That's what decline looks like. And that's what millions of families are already living. And when you combine internal weakness with external competition, you get a turning point in history. America is internally divided, politically polarized, economically unequal, and socially fractured. China, for all its flaws, is externally unified in purpose, strategically focused, and globally ambitious. That's not a fair fight, it's a mismatch, and the outcome is predictable. History doesn't reward the nostalgic, it rewards the strategic. And right now, strategy belongs to Beijing, not Washington. But here's the deeper issue. Decline breeds denial, and denial prevents action. How many times have you heard American leaders dismiss China's rise as exaggerated, or insist that we're still number one? That's denial talking. It's the same denial Britain had when America rose in the early 20th century. Or the same denial Rome had when its rivals grew stronger. Empires don't like to admit they're slipping, but reality doesn't care about pride. The world is shifting, whether we admit it or not. And the longer we stay in denial, the harder the landing will be. Now, here's the real kicker. None of this means ordinary Americans are doomed. Decline at the top doesn't have to mean decline for everyone. If we're honest about what's happening, if we demand real change instead of political theater, if we focus on rebuilding instead of fighting imaginary enemies, we can adapt. We can find new ways to thrive, even in a changing world. But that starts with honesty. And honesty means admitting that the American empire, as we've known it, is fading. The question is whether we manage that decline with wisdom, or let it turn into collapse through denial and arrogance. And here's what history teaches us if we are willing to listen. No empire has ever lasted forever. Not the Romans, not the Mongols, not the Ottomans, not the British. Power shifts, wealth moves, influence migrates. What seems unshakable in one century can be rubble in the next. The question isn't whether America will eventually decline that. Inevitable. The question is how it handles the transition. Do we crash hard, bitter, and divided, clinging to a past that can't return? Or do we accept reality and chart a new course for the future? That's the choice before us right now, whether we like it or not. And make no mistake, the choice is urgent, because time is not on our side. Every year of denial is another year lost to competitors who are unteed, waiting for us to catch up. Every year of infighting is another year of infrastructure unbuilt, schools unfunded, and opportunities missed. Decline doesn't wait for politics to sort itself out. Decline moves forward relentlessly. One closed factory, one unaffordable apartment, one broken promise at a time. And if you've been feeling that sense of unease in your daily life, that quiet dread that tomorrow may not be better than today, that's not just youth, that's the shadow of empire in decline. And yet, within that shadow, there's also a strange kind of clarity, because decline forces choices. It strips away illusions. It shows us what really matters. When Rome finally faced collapse, ordinary Romans had to reinvent how they lived, turning away from imperial grandeur toward local communities, survival skills, and new systems. When Britain shrank as a global power, it found new identity in alliances, in finance, in cultural soft power. The same will be true for America. The empire may fade, but the people, the ideas, the resilience that doesn't have to die. In fact, it can be reborn in new forms, new opportunities, new ways of living that aren't chained to imperial illusions, but only if we're willing to see clearly. Only if we admit the truth. The American empire is not eternal, and pretending otherwise only makes the landing harder. So here's the wake-up call. The age of easy dominance is over. The dollar won't reign forever. The military won't intimidate forever. The culture won't captivate forever, and that's okay. What matters is how we respond, whether with humility and adaptation or with arrogance and denial. If we choose humility, if we invest in people instead of endless wars, if we rebuild communities instead of propping up crumbling illusions, we embrace the future instead of worshiping the past, then America can thrive even in a multipolar world. Not as an empire, but as a nation that learned, adapted, and grew wiser. But if we choose arrogance, if we keep pretending decline isn't real, if we keep fighting each other instead of facing reality, then history will do what it always does: move on without us. And as you hear this, ask yourself, where do you stand? Are you clinging to the illusion that America can go back to some golden age if we just shout loud enough? Or are you willing to face the truth, uncomfortable as it may be, and start preparing for what comes next? Because the future doesn't wait for our feelings, it arrives whether we're ready or not. And if you're watching this, if you've made it this far, you're already ahead of the curve because you're thinking critically, questioning the narrative, and refusing to be lulled into false comfort. That's the beginning of strength in uncertain times. And let me be clear, strength doesn't mean blind faith in empire, it means resilience, adaptability, and vision for life beyond empire. So here's what you can do right now as one person living in this historic shift. Pay attention. Don't get distracted by political theater designed to divide and distract. Look at the trends: economic, cultural, geopolitical, and prepare yourself. Build skills that can't be outsourced. Build communities that can withstand shocks. Save, invest, and protect yourself from the vulnerabilities of a system that's showing cracks. And above all, stay awake. Because the greatest danger in decline isn't the fall itself, it's the sleepwalking that lets the fall become collapse. And if you found value in this perspective, if it shook you a little or opened your eyes, then do something simple but powerful. Share it. Talk about it. Spread the awareness, because the more people see clearly, the more chance we have of turning this decline into transformation instead of disaster. That's how history changes, not through one empire clinging to power, but through ordinary people choosing to face reality and build something new. And if you want more conversations like this, more deep dives into the forces shaping our world, then make sure you stick around. Because this isn't the end of the story, it is just the beginning of a new chapter.